If you're a fan of dark comedy and stop-motion animation, then Memoir of a Snail, maybe right up your alley. It's the latest film from Oscar-winning director Adam Elliott, opening this weekend, and our film columnist Jason Gorber here to tell us all about it. How are you?
Good morning. Nothing like talking snails this early in the morning.
But this is not really the memoir of a snail, is it?
It's the memoir of a young woman who wears a snail hat.
Of course.
And collects snails and collects snail tchotchkes, merchandise, whatever we want to call it. And it's this incredibly moving, sweet, bittersweet, tragic, comic, beautiful animated film. It's absolutely lovely. It's absolutely worth seeking out. And it's got a whole bunch of voice casts. It's got Sarah Snook in it. It's got the monstrously talented Jackie Weaver. And it's one of these great films that comes out of Australia. These quirky, weird, sideways, yet beautifully accessible and beautifully engaging films using animation as a way to bring us into this world, but using the sort of power of story to actually make it far more than anything that's simply child.
How does the animation compare? I mean, there's so many other things that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly hand wrought. So it's stop motion animation using a process whereby you've seen it in stuff like Nightmare Before Christmas, where the heads have the eyes and the mouth sort of replaced while the puppets themselves are sort of animated. We've seen this a lot. People like Guillermo del Toro have employed that with Pinocchio. It's this kind of heightened way of using puppetry, essentially, something that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years before cinema, but using stop motion animation at its most base form actually brings us into the story. And it gives a tactile sense to the location, but it also gives us a way into, there's a distance because they're animated figures, but there's also an authenticity, a reality, as I said, a tactile nature of it, rather than, not that I don't love drawings, not that I don't love even computer animation, but this is very much sort of bringing us into a different way. And there's something fundamental, our response, again, going back to childhood. Most people respond, the marionette culture, the puppet culture that we all grew up with. I'm a child of the Muppets, for God's sakes. But there's something specific about this kind of stop motion animation told in this way, which is a really beautiful dynamic whereby you can tell something that's a drama, and you can tell something that's as serious as any serious drama. Has moments of lightness and comedy. I'm not saying it's dour, but you do that within this context, this heightened context of the animated form, and you're never lost. You're completely, your disbelief is suspended in a really wonderful and elegant way.
It's billed as a dark comedy, so where's the balance between melancholy and funny?
Oh, it's a lot of melancholy.
Okay, yeah.
But again, I mean, it's one of those fun things that Australia cinema has for decades threaded this needle, done this balance, whichever way that we actually want to look at it. In very many ways, it actually mirrors a lot of Canadian cinema, particularly Quebec cinema, actually. This notion of, like, when things are really miserable, you actually find some humor in it. And when it's humorous, you realize that there's a darkness sort of undercutting that balance. We've talked about that before in lots of different cultures dealing with it. But there's something specific about Australia that has managed to sort of bring these quirky and weird and wonderful stories onto an international stage. It's something about them being both this very rich culture, but also slightly isolated. And I think that that has, brought to the fore this kind of remarkable way into this woman's story.
Okay, so that's Memoir of a Snail. Memoir of a Snail. There's another film on your radar, Black Box Diaries.
Yeah, this one's even more, not challenging, but in many ways as powerful. Black Box Diaries is a full-on documentary. It's this woman, Shiori Ito, who is a journalist in Japan. She was sexually assaulted by one of the most prominent political journalists in the country, someone who was working on the biography of the prime minister, absolutely within the echelons of power. And when she came forward with her story, not only was it rejected immediately, but her family actually encouraged her to not come forward. This is a film that speaks to essentially the Me Too movement within Japan and the complexities and uniqueness of that within the Japanese culture. It is obviously a memoir is very much a personal story, but is done with the precision of a journalist. And because of that, the film actually asks these incredibly provocative questions about Japanese culture, but also international culture in general, about the way that these allegations are dealt with, about what it is like to be a victim who's telling their own story, and the dynamic and all that. So those that are interested in, frankly, it plays almost like a true crime thriller, the way that it's almost constructed. So this is her making a film about her memoir, which is about her own experiences. And because of that, there's all these multiple levels, both cinematically, but also just in terms of the subject matter, that I really think that people should actually engage with.
I don't want to destroy the documentary, but I am curious. I don't want to spoil it. What happened to her? What happened to him?
It gets very complicated, and that's part of so much of what the actual film actually deals with. But the allegations, of course, go into a Japanese court system, the court system which is not built to actually accept allegations of this nature. What happened to the prime minister he was friends with? That prime minister was assassinated. So his political cover got thrown away. Japanese politics for the last 10 years, last 100 years, is, let's say, complicated, and obviously the dynamics between male-female, between rich-poor, between all of these elements are addressed in this film. So yes, it's not quote-unquote a spoiler of what happened, but let's put it this way. She has been given, she hasn't been given anything. She has taken on this platform and has given on an international scope an ability to tell her story, and her doing so, people talk about bravery all the time when it comes to documentaries like this. The bravery here is for her to actually not simply tell a story in an insulated way, but to tell her story in a way which actually is involving, which is questioning not just her experience, but the way that these stories get told and reported and codified in terms of not only the court, but also the way that it's actually told in terms of documentary. It interrogates all of that. How her looking into a phone and doing sort of essentially TikTok-like videos is told as a way of her keeping herself sane, of her remembering that her truth is her truth. The film isn't objective in the sort of dry journalistic way, but it is incredibly specific. It's incredibly nuanced. It's incredibly delicate in the way that it's told. And because of that, it doesn't become a polemic. It doesn't become simply something to attack one person or attack one particular system. It's a way for us to engage with something which is very complicated, but to do so with a way which is incredibly engaging, which is what the best of documentaries can do.
Jason, thank you.
All the best.
That's Jason Gorber, Metro Morning's movie columnist and editor-in-chief at thatshelf.com.
That shelf.